Hello, and welcome back to the Rhetorical Reader. I'm Michael, and I am so excited to tell you about my favorite fall book. So it's been a hot minute. I had an idea planned for a video where I talked about multiple fall books, but didn't really work out. And so I'm salvaging what I can from that endeavor to bring you this video. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that other one didn't pan out when I do my October wrap up, because it has a lot to do with the books that I chose to read in preparation for that. But I'm really excited to talk about my favorite fall book, and I think it's going to be something that no one else is talking about. You're not going to hear this from any other booktuber, because honestly, in my life, I've only encountered one person who's actually read it, and many people haven't even heard of it. So I'm really excited to introduce it to people and hopefully create more readers who love it the way that I do. Don't know what was going on with my collar there. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you to the book, then I will read you the back blurb just to give you an idea what you're getting into, and also to remind myself what I can and cannot talk about spoiler-wise. And then I'll tell you a little bit about why this book means so much to me, a bit about the author and some of the other things that they've written. And I'll talk a little bit about this sort of weird quirk that this book has, which I think is perfectly charming, but it probably was worth talking about for some readers. So we'll get into that in a minute. And at the very end, I have a tiny little bit of bonus content that I promise is something else that I salvaged from the other video that I was trying to make. So without further ado, been really burying the lead here. My favorite fall book of all time is The Elfin Ship by James P. Blaylock. And I'm going to read you the back blurb because I think that it'll tell you everything you need to know about what you're going to get into with this book. 3 men and a dog on a raft. Trading with the elves used to be so simple. Every year, Master Cheeser Jonathan Bing would send his very best cheeses downriver to traders who would eventually return with elfin wonders for the people of Twombly Town. But no more. First, the trading post at Willowwood Station was mysteriously destroyed. Then a magical elfin airship began making forays overhead. Jonathan knew something was definitely amiss. So he set off downriver to deliver the cheeses himself, accompanied by the amazing Professor Wurzel, the irrepressible Dooley, and his faithful dog Ahab. It would have been such a pleasant trip if not for the weeping skeleton, mad goblins, magic coins, an evil dwarf, a cloak of invisibility, and a watch that stopped time. Of course, the return trip was not so simple. And yes, let's just address the elephant in the room right now. The main character of the story, the hero, the protagonist, the guy we're rooting for, is a man who makes cheeses for a living. And when I was a kid and I first read this book, I didn't have much of a concept of what people actually did for a living and how people made money. And the idea of being a master cheeser, of being someone who just, that's what you did, was you made cheese for a living, was like the coolest thing I could imagine, because it's cheese. That's awesome. So immediately I was hooked. This book is really simple when it comes to the kind of storytelling that it wants to do, very much in the tradition of something like The Hobbit. I want to also read just a few sentences from the introduction to set the fall tone for this. So, Chapter 1, Gilroy Bastable and the Airship. Summer had somehow passed along into autumn, as it will, and with October came a good bit of rain. And rain isn't at all bad, as long, that is, as you're not caught out in it. The blue skies and white bits of cloud had gone south like geese some weeks back, and roiling gray masses had taken their place overhead. So this book follows a river journey by the Master Cheeser and his weird little cast of characters that go with him, where they spend the late October and early November traveling from their little town downriver to the big seaport and carrying the goods for the winter trade. But what makes this book so charming is that I think you would call this cozy fantasy before we started using the words cozy fantasy, because, as I mentioned, very much in the tradition of The Hobbit, this is a book that is way more about hearth and home than it is about gold and glory. And there are definitely stakes, and there's definitely a sense of an epic sort of storyline happening inside this book, but it's all done with sort of the everyman, everyday nature of the character of Jonathan, just kind of taking it all in stride and trying to do the best that he can inside of a situation that he's completely unprepared for. And so I don't, again, want to give away too much because I think it's very much worth reading. But this is a book that will really kind of touch your heart. It will tell a funny little story that is also a really good fantasy epic at the same time. And I think that has a lot to offer. And it makes me sad because I don't know many people who've read it, and I don't know that it gets any respect, really, when people talk about fantasy. So if you love cozy fantasy, if you love The Hobbit, if you love river journeys, if you're just looking for an excellent, simple fall read, I can't recommend this enough. Blaylock is a great writer. He's really enjoyable. And the fall vibes, the home vibes are just immaculate with this book. And like I said, along with that, it is a really good fantasy. So that's The Elfin Ship by James P. Blaylock. I really do want to talk about one quirk of this book that I think is kind of funny. A lot of older fantasy, this was published in 1982, a lot of older fantasy sometimes has this problem where women are given kind of a short shrift in the story. And Blaylock does not do that, but he does it in a funny way, because this is very much what you could call a bachelor's book, in the sense that women just are not in the story at all. Jonathan and the professor, who are sort of your two main characters, are irrepressibly just middle-aged bachelors, and they don't talk about women. They don't encounter any women in the story, really. And the whole thing is just kind of a simple man book, in very much, again, the same tradition as something like The Hobbit, where you just have this very simple homebody who goes on an adventure and never really encounters women at all. I only mention this quirk because, while I don't think it rises to the level of a disclaimer, I do think that it's something that might bother some audiences, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that if you would find that sort of thing annoying. But I don't think that it detracts from the quality of this book at all, and I think that it's just something that you could file away as a silly little quirk more than anything else. This book has 2 sequels, though one of the books written after is more of a prequel, The Disappearing Dwarf and The Stone Giant. Both of them are also excellent, but neither of them captured my attention as much as this book did. I have been reading this book since 1985, and you can tell how beat up my copy of it is, but I have been reading this book nonstop since 1985, and every year in the fall I make it a point to read this book again, because that's how much I love it and that's how much it means to me. So again, that's The Elfin Ship by James P. Blaylock. I think that it's very much worth your time, and I hope that more people come to love it. I did mention that I wanted to put a little bonus content into this video, and one other story that I wanted to salvage from my attempt at making a more comprehensive fall stories video is a short story that I love very much, and it's called Death in the Librarian by Esther Friesner. And it's a very short little story, and it is in a collection called Death in the Librarian and Other Stories. I actually have a used library book copy of it from the Fort Vancouver Regional Library, which, you know, but I don't know how difficult it is to come across this story anymore. But I wanted to share the introduction of it because, as you can see from this, it's a very short little story. But again, it is an immaculate autumn story. And it starts like this. In an October dusk that smelled of smoke and apples, a lady in a black duster coat and a broad-brimmed hat, heavily veiled, called at Rainey's Emporium in Foster Glen, New York. And that just sets the tone for something that is beautiful and simple and has been memed a few times. When I was in college, I actually wrote a paper about this story because it affected me so deeply. So again, if you're looking for a very gothic, enjoyable fantasy story, for sort of magical realism story for the fall, I can't recommend anything more highly than Death in the Librarium by Esther Friesner. But The Elfin Ship, Death in the Librarian, those are my contributions to BookTube's fall books that you should read kind of idea. And I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that you get something out of it. If you read The Elfin Ship, if you've read The Elfin Ship and you'd like to let me know about it, what you thought of it in the comments, please do. I hope that more readers discover this wonderful little book. So until next time, please take care of yourselves, be good to each other, and I will see you in the next video.